You're listening to another great podcast in the MyMac Podcasting Network.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the show where we take a wander around the week in Apple, Apple News, reviews, technology, associated products, and all sorts of other things that catch our eye. This is another episode of the Essential Apple Podcast. Hello everybody and welcome to this week's episode. And this week I am actually recording early. I'm recording on a Thursday evening because we have with us this week Ashley Houston, who is the CEO of Serif Affinty, who have just recently released their designer for iPad. They have, of course, Affinity Photo for Mac and Windows. They have Affinity Designer for Mac and Windows. They've won awards. And, of course, they have a history stretching back practically to the dawn of desktop publishing. So, welcome, Ashley.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, it's good to be here, mate.
All right, fabulous. And we have the return of Mark. Hello, Mark. How you doing, mate?
Hello. Is this working?
Yes.
Hello. Hello. Oh, this has been a while, isn't it? It was just coming back to the old setup in blowing off the dust on the microphone in my in my dingy little podcasting room. It's good to be on the show, Simon. Thanks for inviting me on.
No problem. Well, obviously, with this episode is going to be an interview with Ashley about Serif and Affinity and a whole load of stuff. So, welcome and thanks for coming on, Ashley. First of all, of course, you did last week release the designer for iPad. So, I understand that's gone rather well. So, would you like to tell us about that first of all?
Yeah, sure. So we launched it last Wednesday. We actually did a live event at our headquarters in Nottingham to launch it. So the whole event went fantastically well. We kind of did like a keynote presentation and had quite a party afterwards. But yeah, overall the launch couldn't have gone any better. We were number one on the App Store within a matter of hours of launching. Apple gave us editor's choice pretty much straight away on Thursday. So that kind of gives us a lot more coverage too. And so far, the customer feedback's just been phenomenal. I mean, the reviews on the App Store are just crazy. Nearly every single one of them are 5 stars. All the noise online and social, people using it seem to be loving what we've done. So far, so good. We're a week in and it seems to have gone really well so far.
And Mark, you had a beta, didn't you? Ashley let you have a beta of the
Yes.
of the designer. What did you think of it?
It took me a little while longer than anticipated to be able to borrow an iPad Pro, but holy moly. Now, I am not a designer. Simon, you know this from some of the stuff I've shared you. I have people that I get to do stuff for me, but it's the first time I've actually gone, I can use this. And what I mean by that is you get some other elemental-based programs that are basically watered down, and they just really do feel like a bigger version of an iPhone app. This is the first time I went, I could actually work on this. Now, what do I mean by doing my work? So I've got a little company going on the side that I print cards, I get the artwork in. I can pull a template off the internet, drop it into Designer, get the artwork, drop it in, format it, adjust the text, do all the spacing. Admittedly, not all the fonts are there, but that's not a problem with Designer. That's just a problem with iOS in general. Get it sorted out, export it into a Dropbox where the printer can pick it up and go. Now, obviously, there is a little bit of a learning curve, and at some points, I have sort of come and done. But what I found is the response on YouTube from actual proper designers has just been, oh, you can do that. Oh, you can do that. And I've got to say, it's the first ever time I've actually felt like this is a Mac app that's actually been thought about to go onto the iPad rather than, oh yeah, we should do an iPad app. So kudos to you, sir. Kudos to you.
Thanks.
And
yeah,
and I'm not just saying that because I've got the free designer, by the way.
I mean, one of the big philosophies that we've got when we went onto iPad, and we did exactly the same thing last year with launching Affinity Photo, is we wanted to do it without any kind of compromise. So our iPad versions literally do have 99% of the features and the functionality of our Mac versions. And I think we are pretty much the only company to have ever really done that. Everyone else has kind of taken the route of doing sort of smaller, sort of bite-sized chunks of apps, if you like. Whereas we wanted to do the full shooting match. I mean, interestingly, the actual back end of the app, like the core fundamental engine of the app, if you like, is actually identical on iPad and Mac. Is no different. The only thing that we've done differently is we've got a different UI layer, obviously, to make it usable on a touch device. But the actual back end is exactly the same, and that's why all the features work the same, all the functionality is there. And of course, also there's file compatibility, 100% file compatibility between the Mac version too.
And it's blazingly fast. I mean, I'm on a first generation Pro.
Mm.
And I'm dragging around the screen. I'm on the iOS 11. It's just absolutely bonkers. And also, this has been one of my pet peeves for the longest time. Is that when you resize an image, it actually does a good job of resizing an image. It doesn't make it all blocky or you lose fidelity. I don't know what voodoo you've put in there, but it's very rare that I gush about an app like this. Very, very rare. And it just ticks all the boxes. Just out of interest, when you were programming it, did you use Swift or did you sort of stick to C or Objective-C?
Yeah, well, a lot of the sort of the core magic, if you like, was all done natively in C++. So we did that because that's the thing that kind of enabled us really to have this core engine that was totally operating system independent. So it can run perfectly on, we can compile it and run it on Windows, on Mac, and on iOS. And that was always a big, and even, in the future we could, not necessarily saying we'd do this, but in the future we could do Android and, whatever other operating systems might come about in the future. We've kind of got this totally operating system independent back end. Now the front end, i.e. the UI layer, then that is something that we have to do sort of specific for each operating system. And yeah, I think for I'm actually not one of the developers, but I think that for the iPad version that is using Swift. But yeah, the actual big bulk of the app, I mean, it's 80% of it is all C++.
Right, very good. And of course, as you mentioned, you did previously you ported Affinity Photo to the iPad with pencil support and all the rest. And if I recall, you almost immediately got a gold award, did you not? Was it Apple App of the Year or something? Was that right?
Yeah, well, pleased you brought it up. Yeah, we so at the end of. So we actually launched it in June, and in fact we actually had the opportunity to present the app at WWDC.
Yeah, that's right. I remember that. It was featured at the WWDC keynote. So
that's right.
That for sure. That's got to be a big accolade.
Yeah, huge. I mean, actually, one of the dreams, I guess, when we first started. We had a couple of things that would have been great if we'd ever done, and when we first started was. It'd be great to get an Apple Design Award because that's kind of like a really coveted thing. We actually did that in 2015. And then the other thing, which we never really kind of thought that we'd get the opportunity to do, was if we could ever get a stage slot on one of Apple's big keynotes. And of course, that happened last year at WWDC. So that was kind of great. And of course, that gives you just huge exposure and everything else that kind of comes along with that. But yeah, at the end of last year, in December, they did award us app of the worldwide app of the year for iPad, which is a big deal. They've got hundreds of thousands of apps to choose from, right? So, the fact that we got that accolade was a real big deal for us for sure.
Yeah, very much so. And of course, as you say, 2015, you got an Apple Design Award. I don't know how many of our listeners are familiar. I'm sure most of them are familiar with the Affinity, but I'm not sure how many of them are, like me, aware that Serif has a history stretching back all the way to the early days of desktop publishing. And of course, for many, many years, you were famous for your Plus range of products on Windows. So I mean, you had Page Plus, Draw Plus, Photo Plus, and
Web Plus.
Web Plus. So yeah, a whole catalogue, obviously. And people on this show know that I have many times mentioned that in my job I work in graphic design for print. And when I'm talking, or have in the past, been talking to people who are Windows based and are either small companies or non-profits or whatever, and they're saying, what should I use to, I'm trying to do this in Word and it's horrible. And I've always pointed them towards Serif Page Plus and Draw Plus because they've always been fabulous products for Windows. So I've been intrigued, really. What was it like making the change to, basically throw all that away, as it were, and start from the ground up? And what made you decide to go Mac first with the Affinity range?
Well, I guess what it was like, it was in some ways a massive gamble. So kind of the history of that is that about 4 or 5 years before we launched Affinity Designer, so we launched our first Mac app, and that was in October 2014. A few of our development team basically come with the idea that they wanted to have an opportunity to start from scratch. I mean, the Plus range products, however good they were, we were 100% tied to Windows. It was basically just going to be an impossible job for us to think about porting those apps to Mac if we ever wanted to do it. It used a lot of Windows libraries, a lot of Windows stuff. So that was really kind of never going to happen. But also the apps, they'd started to, frankly, creak a little bit. We'd been, it was sort of a lot of, it was sort of based on, quite an old code base. We'd been plugging in extra features year in, year out. It was becoming quite hard to maintain. The bugs kept getting introduced, all that type of stuff. So we kind of felt like, it wasn't the long-term plan to just keep sort of plugging more stuff into that code. We kind of had to sort of rethink it. And the main idea is that we really felt that we wanted to be multi-platform, to be taken seriously as graphic design apps and not be on Mac. That's really not doable. So we kind of knew that we needed to go onto Mac, and also we kind of felt like we needed to reinvent ourselves in terms of how we are, go about. In terms of, I guess, the target market that we're really kind of aiming for. The old Plus range products were more suited to, very sort of almost one-man band designers or small business users or hobbyists, frankly. Like a lot of the examples that we used to use when we market Page Plus was things like a poster for the local golf club or your local village fair or something like that. So it was almost more positioned towards a bit more of a home use, even though it had some fantastic professional functionality. So we also kind of wanted to reinvent ourselves to really kind of push more towards the true creative professional. And as I say, I think if we were going to do that, we had to be on Mac. And I think also it's kind of important that we set our stall out and we launched on Mac first too.
Right. Oh, excellent. And obviously, you launched Affinity Designer, then Photo. Now I'm going to ask you a question you probably know I'm going to ask, and I was going to try wishing I wasn't going to ask. What happened to Publisher?
What happened to it? What do you mean?
Well, I believe, as I recall, we were promised a beta for Affinity Publisher in 2017, and now we're a fair way through 2018, and there still is no beta for the Publisher product.
Yeah, so it's. I mean, one thing to say, I guess, is that I think it's quite remarkable what we've done. We've actually only got 12 or 13 developers, so that is our entire development team. And the thing is that frankly, we had to weigh some priorities. We've always in the background been working on lots of publisher type stuff to get ready to launch Publisher. We've always been working on it, but you kind of have to at certain times weigh some priorities in terms of shoring up some of the feature set of the existing apps, in terms of making sure we had a really strong iPad version. So, these are the things that we're kind of constantly weighing up in terms of priorities and
oh yeah. Sorry, I was being slightly, being a bit cheeky there, because obviously I know, building any app from the ground up is not something you just sort of chuck a couple of blokes at for the weekend and there you go, no matter how much experience you've got from, Page Plus or whatever. But the reason I ask is because a lot of people in our Slack room and a lot of people that I know through my work, many of whom are, have moved over to Affinity one way or another. Whenever I mention Affinity, there are several people who will say to me, I'm really, really waiting for the publisher element.
Yeah.
I really want the publisher element, particularly since, of course, Adobe went to a subscription model. A lot of the people that I deal with are not, even though obviously I am a full-time, design for print professional, a lot of the people I work with are either hobbyists or, the sort of people that Page Plus was aimed at, in that they're part-timers. Or they work in small companies and often, or they're hobbyist designers, whatever. And, they love the Affinity range and they just are really, they keep saying to me, what do you know, Simon? I said, well, I don't know anything. I don't know anything. I've never spoken to Serif, except now I have. But, I know that there is pent up demand for the, for the publisher element to complete the package, as it were. So,
yeah, I mean, one of the things that, it's without a doubt something that we know is so hotly anticipated. I mean, every single time we put any kind of post on Twitter or Facebook, even like big news, like we've won App of the Year from Apple out of 300,000 different apps. Yeah. The first comment on that post is, well, that's great, but where's publisher? So, we kind of understand that. But, there is good news here. We're coming to the end of our development here. I've been running Publisher personally for the last few months, been actually doing some serious work in it. So I've got an alpha version of it, and it is coming together great. And we are now committed to being a free public beta by the end of August. So we're only a matter of weeks away, really.
Look at that. See, scoop, essential Apple scoop. You heard it here first. The public beta is coming in August. There you go.
So, actually, on our site now, there's a section for publisher. So as long as people are signed up on our mailing list or whatever, because we might end up doing we might end up having to sort of push the beta out in sort of tranches, if you like, to make sure we don't get absolutely swamped with any issues that there might be on the basis that it's going to be a beta release to start with. So for people to actually make sure they're kind of first in line, I guess, for that. And obviously also being comfortable with the fact that it is going to be a beta release to start with, then that is something, there's more information on that site about that you can sign up to make sure that you are going to be first in line. But yeah, we're looking to start the beta by the end of August, and then all being well, and of course, again, it's software development and things can
all go a bit sideways sometimes.
It can. But all being well, we are still very much aiming to launch it proper by the end of the year.
Oh, well, that is fabulous. Fabulous news.
I'm always there to help beta test and find bugs and then do really weird error reporting. Just out of interest, when you've been doing the old beta testing and bug reporting, did you find many people use the iOS screen recording thing, or did they still go through the way of, I clicked on this and clicked on this? Did you get many videos using screen recorder?
So when we launched Affinity Photo, RC11 wasn't available. And while there was ways to do screen recording, obviously no one really kind of knew how to do it. So for Affinity Photo, when we sort of had some testers on that, there wasn't any real screen recording going down. But actually, when we did Affinity Designer, we did something a little bit different. Actually, we kind of enlisted the help of around 40 or 50 top artists and designers for the main bulk of the beta sort of process, if you like. So this was for about the last 3 or 4 months of development. And we actually very much encouraged them to record their screens with iOS 11 to show us, if there was any kind of bugs or a crash or some other kind of issue. Obviously, having a screen recording is the easiest way to see exactly what's kind of going on. Otherwise, it can be quite hard to describe the recipe that causes the disaster.
And just coming back to launching new products. Now, obviously, Simon's already mentioned that corporate overlord of Adobe. How have you found sort of competing against what they are sort of like the giant monolith of the publishing and graphics industry? Did you get much sort of pushback from like Adobe users, or have you managed to capture them over? Because as Simon said, there's a lot of resistance to subscription-based pricing, and you can just pay for your app. And that will lead me on to the second question of just how long will you support the app before the inevitable comes where you do a feature update and then you think, this is quite a big jump. Maybe we need to charge, because Apple still doesn't do upgrade pricing.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of competing with Adobe, I guess that, it was kind of between the point that we actually started developing Affinity and actually releasing it that they switched to a subscription model. We didn't know that they were going to do that when we first started out. So I think that, it has to be said for a company like us that them doing that and then us launching without subscription, kind of doing it in the old school software licensing way, if you like, definitely was a big thing for us. There was a lot of designers, a lot of people in that design community who were getting very, who did feel a little bit frustrated about being, as they kind of felt, being sort of forced to take up a subscription. So I think that was something that, we got a lot of positivity about, that, there is actually some, alternatives for some people, and the basis that it's not a subscription is obviously a big advantage to people. So we never really got any negativity, so we didn't really come across any sort of major Adobe fanboys or, whatever you want to call them, like sort of being in any way, negative towards what we're doing. So all we've really had is kind of positive feedback about what we're doing. Obviously there's plenty of people who would say, well, we don't have this feature or that feature, and until you do have those things, then for their workflows that they can't make any kind of switch or change from whatever apps that they're currently using. But that's still not negative feedback as such. That's just saying, well, it's kind of given us some feedback as to what new stuff we should be adding.
Well, I've got a little story here, Ashley, which will please you mightily, I'm sure. But when Affinity Designer first launched, there's a guy I know, I won't name him, but he was he's a professional illustrator. He worked for many years, obviously, in Adobe Illustrator. He was Adobe certified trainer. He was, done all the sort of every accolade Adobe could heap upon him. He'd had by doing all their academies and this, that, and the other. And when Affinity Designer came out, he he gave that a go and he was quite pleased. And then Adobe announced subscription pricing, which he didn't like. And then he had a problem. He thought he'd subscribe anyway as a long-time Illustrator user, and then he had a problem with his subscription. And when he spoke to Adobe, they as good as accused him of trying to steal their product. So he was not best pleased after 20 years of using Adobe Illustrator to be basically accused of stealing their product. And so he went, right, well, effectively, screw you. I'm going to change to Affinity, and has done, and is now works, as far as I'm aware, exclusively in Designer. So there we go. Yeah,
cool.
That's good. There you go. And yes, also you as I say, a lot of the people that I know and the people I come into contact with are I'm not saying they're not professionals, but they're not necessarily full-time designers. So, like us as a print company, the cost of 2 subscriptions to Creative Cloud per month is pennies relatively, because we're using that to generate income. That feeds our factory with work. But if you're a hobbyist or a part-timist or a charity, then that's pretty onerous, really. You start thinking about paying out £40-50 a month. That's quite a lot of money. And that one month's subscription will buy you, Affinity Photo or Designer. So I do know a lot of people have taken that route and they've changed over to Affinity for that reason.
Well, I'm exactly in that boat, because before you put me onto it, I was having to go all sorts of hacks to try and do PDF layout and stuff like that, and to go, oh, you know what, I'll plop down the money for this, and it's just been absolutely worth it. And here I am being a fanboy again.
I mean, I've got to say, like, it, while of course people are making some decision to sort of adopt Affinity for pricing reasons. I mean, and of course, that is part of what we're about. We kind of price our apps what we think is a sort of fair and reasonable price, and we don't do a subscription model because that isn't something that we necessarily believe in. So there's that kind of part of it. But genuinely for us, it's also very important, and probably more and more so moving forward, that we actually feel that people are making the decision to use our apps because they feel it provides a better workflow for them. It perhaps works faster for them. And I think that, certainly when we launch Publisher, we're hoping, one of the big philosophies that we had when we first started was that we had obviously sort of cross-platform apps, but also a shared file format between all of our apps. And so we definitely recognise that a frustration with studios or even sort of big corporations and whatever is that if people are working on Illustrator and Photoshop and InDesign, there is no shared file format as such. So lots of times work has to be flattened and exported, and change is lost. And what we're going to be doing, and I think it makes a lot more sense when we've got Publisher in the mix as well, is that, of course, the file format is identical. So if you've got a design that's been created in Affinity Designer and you drop that into your page layout in Affinity Publisher, you can still access all of the layers, all of the components of that design that's been created in Designer. Or indeed, if someone's done some editing on an image in Affinity Photo, it's got some adjustment layers on, for example, or some masks or whatever it might be. Again, when that's brought into Publisher, all of that information, if you like, is still going to be available, apart from the fact that you don't have the step of having to export into some other format or whatever before you do it. So we've always felt that, when we have this suites together, and definitely I think Publisher is is almost the glue that kind of sticks it together, that kind of advantage of workflow that hopefully people will see, then that they will want to be using Affinity just because of that.
Yeah,
irrespective.
that sounds fabulous, actually. That really does. And I know, as I say, a lot of people are waiting for the Publisher, and I think that is because, although sometimes the page layout applications, I'm not saying they get overlooked, because there are plenty of page layout applications out there, don't get me wrong, but I think photo editing is obviously, your Photoshop competitors or Photoshop like apps. There is a big range of those available, and obviously there are an awful lot of photographers in the world. Everybody's a photographer, really, of some level, and so the ability to take their pictures and sharpen them and rotate them and brighten them and all those sort of things. There are less people who do vector drawing, I admit, but in the end, on the whole, most of those elements, if you're doing any sort of print publishing or assembly, or even to some extent web design, you have to have a way to you have to have a pot that all these things go into in the end, and that is I know it's my trade, so therefore I'm very interested in page layout applications, sort of collecting anywhere between, you know, cheap ones, odd ones, weird ones. It's a bit of my hobby, but no, I think, and also, you know, people think of that as a set, don't they? They think, right, you've got your photos, you've got your vectors, and then you've got your page layout, and that is your triumvirate, really. And I'm really looking forward to it. I really am. And I know loads of people, my Macintosh user group, I can't tell you how many people there mention, whenever I mention Affinity, I really can't wait for them to bring out the page layout package. So it's just fantastic.
Going back to going back to Designer, what would you say has been your landmark feature and the one that was most fun to sort of develop for? What's the sort of the thing that makes you smile inside when you go, "Yep, that's a good move"?
I mean, I think without a doubt, the thing that makes me smile the most about Designer is the fact that you can zoom to like 20, 30 million %. And it's just a crazy thing, and like, it's one of those things that whenever you demo it or you show it in a video or whatever, literally, if you have an audience, you can actually literally see their, you know, jaws drop. It's one of those just a winning thing to be able to kind of show. So the fact that we kind of, and again, I'm not a developer, so I can't, but the fact that right from the very start in the core, I think it's something to do with floating points or something or other, but the accuracy that was built in from the start on that side of things was the reason that we can achieve something like that. I mean, one of the developers has had previous experience with, you know, a lot of previous experience with like CAD software, you know, and stuff like that, where you have to be pinpoint precision with stuff. So that was a decision that they made, that we had that level of precision. But the ultimate result for me is that when I'm doing a demo, I can just keep zooming in, and people are going, "Wow, that's just amazing." So that's probably my favourite thing of Designer. Yeah,
I was going to say one other feature that I really like is you seem to have nailed people like me with the shapes. That when you're how do you explain? So you touch on the screen, and when you're zoomed in, because you can't see what's directly underneath your finger, you get like a little magnifying glass pop up in just the right space. But not only, which is, you know, there are other apps which do it. But what I really like about this is when you take your finger off, you seem to have jitter correction down to a T. I mean, the best example I can think about this is in Google Photo Scan, where you scan a picture and it comes out really nice. But if you want to refine the edges, you tap on the edge, but when you take your finger off, because your finger can wobble side to side, you lose that pinpoint accuracy. Yeah, whatever magic you're doing, you can just go there, you tape your finger off, and you're not going, God damn it, I've just spent 5 minutes trying to get that perfect pixel. And it just hangs just there. That's also one of the features I really like, and I'm sure there are designers screaming out there going, but what about this feature? But what about that? But I can only speak from, you know, the experience of a.
Well, I suspect, Mark. I suspect that the way that it does that is probably tied to exactly what Ashley was talking about. The fact that the the floating point is down to 10 decimal places or something, so that the jitter is it's allowed. You know, you've got plenty of room to work out what's jitter and what isn't.
It's interesting actually that, as I said, when we were developing a Designer, we had the help of quite a lot of artists, and one of the big things that we really worked with them on was in precisely how the app behaved in exactly the type of position that you just described, Mark. And there's lots of variables that we can play with, and all of them have some kind of compromises, you know, when you're working with touch. So yeah, you absolutely want to make sure that when a finger is released, you kind of need to ignore the last couple of things that finger did, because as you said, it's kind of had some jitter. But then there is a compromise to that, because that means that you're always kind of, it can then add some lag into what you're doing, because you're almost kind of waiting for it might only be like a few milliseconds, but you're always kind of waiting. Whatever action you're doing, is this guy going to release his finger, right? And is that the end of it? So you kind of have to do a bit of a balancing act with all of these things, but it is genuinely stuff that we put a lot of work in. And so I'm pleased that you've noticed it.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And it's also one of those things that I'm sure there's a lot more work to be done as well. We'll be constantly improving in all of that kind of area of how people interact with touch, and of course with pencil too, because it's all kind of new. There's no sort of white paper on all the best practices of how to do this stuff. We're kind of having to learn by experience, really.
Yeah. And that's always one. I mean, what this has sort of done, like you saying that you've gone out and got an artist to actually, you've got people to use it rather than being a bunch of very, very clever engineers. And believe you me, I've seen some fantastically clever engineers, but geez, does their front end suck. It does give me hope that when, what was it back in WWDC when they say we've got, I can't remember, was it a Mac Pro or some software? And they said, right, we've given this to artists, to engineers, to people that are using it in the field, and we're actually watching how they use it. And if they do half as good a job as what you guys have done so far, and like I say, I have only touched the scratch the surface. But for some reason, you guys keep coming up on my blimmin' YouTube video. It's like, oh, there's an interesting tutorial there, and then I lose an hour of my life.
I was going to say as well, obviously, it came up on the last show, actually, that Luminar, we've had Alex from Skylum on, talking about Luminar, and it came up in the last show that your Affinity Photo allows the use of Luminar as a plugin, which it seems to be very popular with people, which...
I've got to be honest. Does it? I mean,
yes, apparently it does. I was going to ask you, did you work together on that, or is that something that just has come along through the plug-in architecture that Apple enables? Because somebody tweeted it, and then somebody else then retweeted it to me because apparently even Alex from Skylum said that Luminar does some things absolutely fabulously, but it's not a Photoshop replacement. So, in fact, he said that himself he uses a lot of Luminar features as plugins in Photoshop. But, I was really pleased to see that because it's, I think that's, it's great when you get people, independent or smaller companies, if you like, with that kind of cross pollination, because that means you don't have to go away and redo all the work that Luminar do, building their adjustment tools, and build it. You don't have to build a Lightroom replacement, inside of Affinity itself. You can concentrate on doing what Photos does, and people can bring the Luminar functionality in if that's what they want to do. So I think I really like that. It reminds me in some ways of something possibly before your Mac days, well, long before your Mac days, quite likely, and that was OpenDoc, which was something that never went anywhere, but that was a kind of plug-in architecture.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that. So I mean, at the moment we've kind of got a certain level of plugin support. So quite often plugins that work on Photoshop, for example, will work with us. So perhaps that's what was coming about with that. But it's an area that we know that we want to open up a lot more. So we do want to enable scripting with our apps, and for people to effectively be able to write functionality or plugins specifically for our Affinity apps, because we know that we can't do it all, and very often, I mean, especially when you talk about desktop publishing, many companies who say use InDesign, for example, or even Quark Express for that matter, if they're still using that, they'll have a lot of actual custom work that's been done behind the scenes, lots of scripts and plugins written, that's very specific to that organization. And for us to sort of ever think of being able to get into that market, we're obviously not going to do loads of custom work for each individual company, but what we do need to do is kind of open up the back end a bit of our apps and enable other developers to write stuff that that kind of plugs into our core back end sort of technology, if you like. So that's definitely an area that we're thinking about, and hopefully we'll have some updates on that side of things next year.
All right, excellent. I was going to say, yeah, because I don't particularly use any number of plugins with within design or with Quark when back in the day when I worked with Quark. However, I know they're depending on what you do. There is still a thriving ecosystem of specialist plugins for all those apps. Quark, depending on what it is you do. If you do particular types of specialist work where InDesign or Quark were not specifically written to do that because they're general page layout applications. But I don't know, if you do certain types of work, packaging, for example, I know that there are plugins available for people who work in packaging that allow them to do things like model the 3D webs, so that they can map the export visuals of what the box will look like, or all sorts of things, and they can be incredibly specialist. But obviously, people who do that are not going to move to another app unless they can have that kind of functionality recreated. So that's
I mean, probably almost one of the more common ones really is that lots of companies use lots of different asset management systems, where they have all of their imagery and graphics stored in whatever kind of process and system that they've got for that. It's the same for fonts. People use lots of different font management systems, and we're not necessarily going to say that we're going to write specific functionality and integration to all of these different systems ourselves, but we do need to kind of open stuff up in such a way to mean that someone else can. So yeah. Anyway, that's definitely something.
Well, something looking forward. That's like all such things. I did want to ask you as well, Ashley. Because once the Affinity, the first two Affinity products were established, you did then, of course, in effect, kind of counter to your history, went the other way, and then moved the Affinity products to Windows. So, what was that like? Was that a bit of a strange sensation, really, going in the it seems like, I don't know, counterintuitive almost. Don't get me wrong, because obviously there's a perfectly good market on Windows. I'm not dissing Windows from that point of view. I wondered what it was like being, all those years as Windows developers and then kind of going to Mac and then like reversing direction, as it were.
I think what you're trying to say is what platform do you prefer?
No, not at all.
Well, I'll tell you that too. But I think that so the first thing to say, it was always in our minds, right from the very get-go when we first started developing it, was going to be cross-platform. So for us, it wasn't, we launched the Mac versions. We did want to be Mac first. I think that was kind of important for us to, I don't know, in some ways set our stall out. But I think also we were quite keen to have a UI that was more what Mac people would be used to in some ways rather than Windows. So we felt that was very important to be Mac first. But it was, right from when we very first started, we always knew and we always said that we would be, eventually launching on Windows. So while of course the Mac ownership or whatever in the world is only 15% or something like that compared with Windows. Even when you talk about the design community and creative professionals, you're still probably only up to 50-50. So we kind of still knew that launching on Windows would sort of double our sales.
Why would you not?
And that's exactly what it's done. So yeah, I mean, in terms of what we prefer, I think that Mac has so many nice things about it. It's and it's primarily down to hardware, more so necessarily than the operating system. But obviously, the great thing with Mac is that fundamentally you are working to a discrete number of sort of device specifications. Kind of every single iMac and every single MacBook Pro configuration that's available. Whereas Windows, there's obviously millions and millions and millions. People customize their machines and stick different graphics cards in and whatever it might be. But and I think also because of that, what has has been far more easy for us to achieve on Mac than Windows has been graphics acceleration. So, and this is a bit of an operating system thing as well, actually. But obviously, Apple kind of give us Metal basically to sort of plug into, and that means that we can achieve GPU acceleration. I think in a much more straightforward way than trying to do it on Windows through DirectX and what's involved with that. So almost certainly, if I was to ask the developers, they do prefer working on the Mac version for those reasons.
Just to ask one question, you did mention something there that I've always been wanting to hear. So you guys are actually using Metal?
Yes.
What is that experience like? Because I've been trying to sort of do a bit of research and find Metal-enabled apps. Did you do it? Did you ever do a benchmark of using OpenCL versus Metal, or was Metal the choice from the start?
So no, it wasn't a choice from the start. So we were using OpenCL, and I mean, as it happens, we're kind of currently doing a lot more. So on iPad, so first of all, on iPad, everything is very, very Metal optimized. We had to do it on iPad because so like many of the photo filters and filter effects and what have you when you're using photo on iPad are all Metal accelerated, and in fact at that point that was actually achieving speeds for us that was faster than what we could do even on a Mac Pro. So all those kind of effects where you're actually pushing pixels around, like you're applying say a motion blur to something, or a twirl, or a sphere effect, all of those types of things. When you can take advantage of the GPU fully, the speed is just incredible. So when we first launched Designer on iPad, then actually, for the filter effect side of things, and many of those things that we could sort of hardware accelerate, that was actually giving us better performance than even on a top spec Mac, which was pretty crazy, really. But since then, we've actually been going through and starting to optimize further the Mac version, and actually, we should have an update later on this year that hopefully will be a lot more comprehensively graphics accelerated too.
So just to go back to something, so when you were testing on the iPad, you were actually outperforming a Mac Pro. Did I hear that right, or
You heard that right.
Gone to be? Yeah,
no, you heard that right.
So when Tim is on stage, it isn't just like your typical hyperbole from Apple to say, this is how fast it is. This is actually that's actually mind blowing. And that's the thing about the iPad. You look at the shovelware that goes on there, and yes, it's got to be some sort of overhead to sort of like put Metal on there, but that's some gain.
Yeah, I think that there's kind of two things really. I mean, the first thing is that while we were getting better performance on iPad than say a Mac Pro, that's not to say that we couldn't achieve better performance on a Mac Pro if we fully optimize everything with Metal, and that's obviously what we're working through now. But it wasn't as important for desktop to start with, for Mac to start with, because actually the speed's pretty good anyway. But on iPad, if we tried to do any of those kind of filter effects without any hardware acceleration, then the speed was terrible. So we kind of had to do hardware acceleration and use Metal on iPad to get good performance, and then it turned out actually it was substantially better performance than we could even get on a desktop. The other thing with iPad actually, which is interesting, is the chip architecture. Is that while of course even the latest iPad Pro is only 3 cores, and which is the clock speed is a lot lower than what you can get on a Mac. But the interesting thing is that the GPU actually shares the same memory as the CPU. And for us, that's quite a big deal, because we're often doing operations and between what needs to be done in CPU and then what needs to be done in GPU. And when of course the memory is separate, as it is in nearly every desktop machine that there is, then it takes time, because you have to keep passing information between the two sets of memory. Whereas an iPad is actually all the same memory. So is totally free. So if you want to do something in GPU that needs some of that memory of something that was previously being done on CPU, is a totally free operation, takes no time at all. Whereas, there's a cost associated with that on desktop. So that's the other kind of cool thing about the way that they've architected the chips in iPad.
Because that just sort of brings me on, because I've just been looking today at the Microsoft Surface Go and a lot of the potential reviews. They're saying, oh, it's faster than the iPad, and then you get the inevitable Android tablets. Oh, it's faster and it's got more memory. But yet they just don't seem to, but off what you're saying, they're just not going to compare just because of just how well, and probably underrated, I would say, that the iPad is. Do you think the iPad now, with people like yourself coming onto the scene, is going to get a little bit more of maybe a renaissance period, or start being taken a little bit more seriously? Or am I just one of those people that look at it and go, well, it's not done what I've been able to want it to do, so it's just a big browser or Netflix viewer?
I hope so. I mean, at the end of the day, it's an incredible device, and it's an incredible device for creatives in particular. I think, and there's absolutely there's no reason whatsoever in terms of the power and the hardware that's in iPad, in particular, of course, iPad Pro, that's under the hood, to mean that it can't run full-fledged, proper pro-end applications and give a fantastic experience. I'd like to think that's what we're doing. But at what point, I think you're right. I mean, there is a bit of a perception of that it's still not being a true replacement for say a MacBook Pro, or maybe even one of the higher spec Surfaces where you can run all your pro applications that you're used to. It requires effort from developers. That's the thing. The hardware's there. The iPad is fantastic, but it requires effort from people like us to actually put our apps on it, because you can't. It's not like a Surface where it just runs anyway, because it just runs Windows. Even though there's issues there. I mean, I've got to say, like, there's issues with, say, running something like, Affinity Photo, for example, or Photoshop, or any kind of pro-end app on a Surface, because the UI is still the same UI as what you have on desktop, when it's mostly focused on using a mouse and not necessarily touch focus. So it can be quite frustrating to use any kind of pro-end app on a relatively small form factor Surface. So the great thing about iPad is that you have the opportunity with iOS to have a really touch-focused UI and something that to make the experience great, which hopefully is what we're doing and what we've done. But at the same time, it requires a lot of effort. And so I think it is down to developers to produce the professional level apps. And just like I said, there's no restriction from the hardware point of view. I think it's just down to us.
Well, I think because Adobe have finally announced that they're going to do a proper Photoshop for iPad last week, I think. Yeah, finally, but won't be out until 2019 apparently, which could be anything up to another 15 months away or something. But why has it taken them so long? I just don't think, we were talking about it on the show, and we just don't think Adobe thought it was worth the effort.
Well, it's like you were saying, isn't it? The iPad market is still relatively small, so in a way, it's quite a ballsy move to say, right, we're going to do such a major app for the iPad.
I think it's the opposite. I think they were just being lazy, and the fact that Affinity Photo, which is a full level, people like Pixelmator and I can't remember if Skylum don't do an iPad ad, I don't think, but there are people putting in the effort, and when that starts to bite, I think that's when Adobe have suddenly thought, well, if we don't get on there, we're gonna lose prominence, because people will start saying, well, if you're working on an iPad, the default choice is Affinity Photo or Affinity Designer.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I think that the advantage that we were in is that because we actually started from scratch, as I said to you,
and it's all written in exactly
towards the start. The back end of Affinity Photo is exactly the same on iPad as it is on Mac, as it is on Windows, and we developed it in such a way to mean that it could run on iPad. So I imagine for Adobe, the back end of Photoshop right now,
I wouldn't
come close to run on iPad.
I wouldn't even like to think, Ashley.
Yeah.
I wouldn't like to think. I mean, I'm pretty sure that to a large extent, not necessarily all the way through, but to a large extent, I think you'd probably find that if you disassembled a lot of Adobe stuff, it's probably in a similar kind of state to the end stage plus range. That it's got components going back years, decades even.
Yeah.
So to reverse engineer that is not, I might be mocking them slightly, but I know it's far from trivial, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I mean, I think the thing that would be interesting to see what happens there is actually, is it just is it Photoshop on iPad, and it's or is there going to be some kind of rewrite of the desktop version at the same time? But it's all speculation. I mean, the information about it's relatively sketchy, so it's one of those things we'll have to wait and see. It's not something that we're worried about at all. By the way,
No, I'm sure you're not. It's no. I think the truth is, or should I say, part of the problem. I'm sure it is a huge undertaking. Joking aside, but I don't think Adobe really wanted to apply themselves, and I think maybe they took the let's wait and see where the iPad goes. Maybe they, but ever since the iPad, they've kind of messed around with putting out these sort of piddling, half-arsed bits of apps, if you know what I mean. They had we'll take a few core functions from Photoshop and we'll make this Adobe photo edit for iPad.
That grinds my gears when you see photo editor and you go, no, it's not. It lets you do funky little filters, but part of a photo editor is let me resize the image.
That's his, don't get him started, Ashley. Don't get him started.
And
right.
I'm with you, by the way, on the Microsoft Surface. I've had one for a year and a half now, and I've still, other than OneNote, yet to find what I would call a good, non-shovelly, half-decent app. And this is like 2 years into having a Surface. And you're right, it's because there's not enough difference between it's just Windows, but then it's trying to be something that it doesn't really feel like it should be a tablet. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I mean, the thing with that is that, again, it's not necessarily Microsoft's fault. It's there are routes that developers can take, and that certainly, say for example, we could take to mean that the experience on if someone's using a 12-inch Surface touch device versus a 28-inch monitor on a big desktop box, there is stuff that we can, there are tools that are available to us to mean that we can make a much better touch experience on Surface. But again, it's one of those things that takes effort. So kind of Surface has got the advantage in that you can just natively run the same Windows app that you can run on your big 28-inch screen with a mouse. But so you do just kind of get that out of the box. But really, to make it a great experience, as a developer, you have to put a lot of effort into it, and it's an area again that we haven't yet done necessarily. But it is one that we'll certainly be potentially looking to do more of in the future.
And just one more quick question about development. What was your take on the whole Marzipan thing, where they sort of said, these apps have been developed using, was it the cross framework thing? Did that excite you at all? Did that interest you at all? Or is it still way too early to sort of say anything about it?
I've got to be honest, and I'm not sure what you're talking about.
It was the WWDC where they said, these apps were developed for iOS and now here they are running on a Mac. Do you remember that bit?
Yeah, I think that we're going to wait and see how that plays out. I mean, for us, I'm not sure how relevant it is. I think that for us, we see this real nice hard split between if you're working on Mac, we're kind of assuming you've got a keyboard and a trackpad and a mouse, and we can have a really high density UI that's highly productive, when you've got these other sort of tools available to you. And when you're on iPad, you want something that takes away less screen space. You've got tabs that kind of dock and float in and out, and you've got other methods of interacting with it with touch. So for us, even I could imagine even if you could run Affinity Photo iOS on a Mac, it wouldn't necessarily be a great experience, because it's all built around the fact that you can touch the screen. So I don't know. I'm sure for some apps it almost doesn't really matter, but for us, when we put so much effort into
I think I'll be honest, I'm pretty sure that the main point of that technology is going to be to enable some of the sort of iOS apps that you can get, which are often quite specialist. They're almost widgets in a desktop sense. That it's going to allow people to port those sort of things. I'm with you. That why would you bother to bring something which is basically touch focused for the iPad and then port that to the Mac? It makes no sense whatsoever, unless you'd either have to put in a huge amount of work, or it'd have to be a very, very niche product, I think. But I think the real point of that is more to allow the sort of cross fertilization of sort of widgety type apps.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I guess we talk from a unique position here, because we've actually got a full-blown Mac app and an iPad app, and we're one of the very, very few companies that actually has that. If you're an iPad app only company, then I guess this is all kind of good news, and like, for example, I don't know, potentially for, say, Procreate to start running on a Mac without them having to do too much work. I guess that's a good thing for them. But yeah, we kind of talk from a unique position where we've already got a full-blown OS X app. And
you've already done all the work, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Ashley, that's been we've done over an hour, and thank you very much for coming on. I think you've been you've been very open, and thanks for talking to us. And I will just say, at the moment, I believe you have a launch sale, do you not, on Designer for iPad? I think
we do. Well, in fact, to sort of celebrate the launch totally, we've got a sale across all of our apps and our workbooks on our site at the moment. So it's on affinity.serif.com, and everything's 30% off. And of course, in particular, that's focused around Affinity Designer for iPad, which is currently only £13.99, obviously with no subscription.
Look at that. What a bargain. Bargain. Blimey. 3 pints of beer.
$13.99.
Yep. Normal price is $19.99, I believe. So there you go.
I almost feel bad now. I was about to start begging for a freebie, but stop that. I'm going to go buy it. Don't kick me off to...
Right. Okay. So, Ashley, obviously you've plugged your site. Is there anything else you'd like to plug? Do you do a Serif Twitter or Facebook group or any such thing?
All the usual channels are at Affinity by Serif. So that's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Fantastic. So by all means, I'll do that plug as well.
Jolly good. Well, thank you, Ashley. And I will just say, Mark, do you want to do the social bit?
Yeah, you can follow us on, well, my Twitter thingy at the moment is at Ocean Speed. We have the Twitter at Essential Apple, and we've got the Facebook page that we're going to be looking to update as well. And of course, you can find us over at essentialapple.com, where we will have a link to them and this very, very podcast, but you've probably already found the podcast by now. But from a non-designer, from a person who basically just wants to be able to move text around on the screen, line things up, it has saved me. Oh, God, I'm going to sound like an infomercial. I am not a designer. I know nothing, Jon Snow, but even I've been able to go, you know what? That doesn't actually look half bad. And once you get into it, once you start tinkering, as long as you've got some free, as long as you've got a bit of a creative outlet in you, believe me, I don't. I actually prefer it to my lifelong affiliation with Adobe for doing a heck of a lot of things. And for a lot of jobs, it's even taken over from, I don't want to say the other mater of the Pixel company, because I like that app as well. But yes, kudos to you, sir, for releasing such a good app on both Mac and iPad.
Thanks.
That not there, nothing will.
Right. Yes. So, as Mark said, we are on the Twitters as @EssentialApple. We are on the web as essentialapple.com. I am on the Twitter as @Serenak, and that's SERENAK. And this has been a special edition of the Essential Apple podcast with Ashley Hewson of Serif Affinity, and thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody.
Ta-da!
See you later.
Cheers.
Something really unusual this week in Nemo's hardware store. It's an iPhone case, but not any iPhone case. Keep listening. The company is called HitCase, HITCASE, hitcase.com. They make cases for all the iPhones. Today we are concerned with the HitCase Shield Link for the iPhone X or 10. Cost $90 in the US. They have two other models for the iPhone 10. We will discuss at another time. You can see links for all three on the website we will provide at hitcase.com. The other two are HitCase Pro for $100 and the HitCase Creo, CRIO, for $30. The Creo is a basic case. The Pro is a heavy-duty case with rails for connecting to GoPro type accessories. And the one we are recommending today and are discussing is the HitCase Shield Link. Comes in two colors, black or a fleshy pink. It's a full body, waterproof, drop proof, everything proof protection. Comes with two different clear membrane covers that are capacitive touch. One for most conditions, typical hiking, whatever, normal life, and the other a special water cover if you're going to go diving and you need that extra seal protection. Very easy to install your phone, insert it in there, and to replace the cover with very, very good, snug, waterproof, dustproof, drop-proof seals. Works fine with my Qi wireless iPhone 10 charger that I reviewed a couple of weeks ago from Witty Design, called the Candy, CANDI. Phone charges up just great through the case. All the ports are accessible as you would expect. There's a flap to cover up the lightning port input so that it doesn't get ruined if your case happens to get wet. Clear glass on the back covering both of the lenses in the iPhone 10, so there's no distortion or aberration when you're taking pictures. But the best thing about it is the accessory lenses. It's a protect everything, go everywhere case. Okay, so far so good. Worth $90. Then you follow the next link to the TrueLux Lens Bundle. $100 US. TRUELUX Lens Bundle. Take your photography to the next level with three lenses. A super wide, a wide, and a macro. The wide doubles the width of the viewing that you normally get with your iPhone 10. The macro is a 3x magnification, so everything is 3 times larger than real life. And the super wide or ultra wide is almost a fisheye. It's very, very, very round and inclusive. You'll have to look up pictures that people have done in order to see some of the examples, but you get the basic idea. Lenses are very sturdy, robust, well crafted. How do they attach to the hit case? They are magnetized. This is better and different than any manufacturer I've had from Olo Clip or anybody else. You remove it from its little rubber protection that goes on the lens elements, and you just literally set it on either one of your standard or 2x lens placements on the back of the hit case, and you start taking your pictures. It is that easy. You can even use them underwater. So if it sounds too good to be true, it is not. We are impressed with the TrueLux iPhone lens kit for the iPhone 10 hit case Shield Link. There are many other features and advantages of this case system for other attachments. I'm not going to discuss that today. Other people can deal with that on podcasts, websites, and reviews. I just want to introduce you to the amazing lenses and the great protection you get for a reasonable amount of money to protect your ultra expensive, ultra valuable iPhone X. 2 things to be aware of. The knob on the side that turns the speaker on and off takes a while to loosen up or to soften up. It's a little bit stiff and tricky at first, so just be aware of that to turn your mute phone off or on. And the hole at the bottom in the case where the lightning cable comes in to charge up your phone is just the right size for the Apple lightning tip, but it's too small for many third-party lightning adapters and tips that I have tried so far. Those are the only things to be aware of that are possible negatives, but the positives so far outweigh it. So have a look, find out what it costs in your country, start saving, and protect your iPhone X. And remember, they do make cases for all the other phones. So go to hitcase.com and check them out. Nemo's Hardware Store, back next week.
This has been the Essential Apple podcast, and I'd just like to say that if you enjoy the show and would like to support us, go over to essentialapple.com and you can take a look at the Patreon or the Pinecast Tips Jar, where you can either make a single donation or you can make a regular subscription, and all the money that you donate will go towards paying for the things like hosting and better microphones and such like. And of course, a very special thank you to those of you who already do support the show. We really do appreciate it. Thank you very much. We are part of the MyMac Podcasting Network, where you can find such shows as Tech Fan with Tim and Dave, MyMac with Guy and Gaz, the Three Geeky Ladies, the geekiest show ever, the excellent Bart Bouchotts with his Let's Talk, the Club Nintendo, and probably some that I forgot. So why not head over to mymac.com, download a show, and take a listen.
Looking for a podcast to get your geek on? Then listen to my favorite ladies podcast, The Three Geeky Ladies. Join Alyssa, Suze, and Vicky as they discuss tech products and other topics that caught their attention. The Three Geeky Ladies podcast on the MyMac Podcasting Network.
Has been the Essential Apple Podcast. Goodbye and thank you for listening.